Hello and welcome to another video showcasing Formula One, in particular looking at my collection of Formula One postcards. That I've had more than 30 years. This particular deck of 10 cards in this video is about Formula One cars from the 1950s. My last video I did drivers from the 1950s. So let's start at the very beginning. 1950. This was the first year that the World Championship was held, and it was dominated by this Alfa Romeo Tipo 158. This photo is of Giuseppe Farina winning at Silverstone. So this picture is from the very first World Championship Grand Prix. Alfa Romeo won every race that year, apart from the Indy 500. Yes, strangely, the Indy 500 was part of the Formula One World Championship, even though no drivers from Formula One took part in it, and no IndyCar drivers took part in the Formula One races. But it still counted towards the Formula One World Championship. It's very strange. That happened throughout the 50s. So if we ignore the Indy 500, then every race was won by Alfa Romeo, either by Farina or his teammate Manuel Fangio. This is an Italian team, of course, Alfa Romeo. Not only did they win every race, Alfa Romeo, but they also got pole position in every race and fastest lap in every race. Quite a dominant year. 1951. This is the Alfa Romeo Tipo 159. Again, this is a picture of Farina at Silverstone, British Grand Prix. His teammate Fangio won the title, but there was another team that came on the scene this year, having been founded a few years beforehand by an Alfa Romeo mechanic. He split from the team, from Alfa Romeo, and formed his own team, and they won their first race this year, the first Grand Prix, and they won, and 3 races they won basically. This is not that car, of course, this is the Alfa Romeo. The name of that mechanic that founded this other team was Enzo Ferrari. So this was the first year that Alfa Romeo, the championship, this was only the championship's second year, of course, but this was when they started to get challenged by Ferrari. And here we have the 1952 Ferrari Tipo 500. This is Alberto Ascari. at the Nürburgring in Germany. In this year, Ferrari won every race. Piero Taruffi won the first race, and then Alberto Ascari won all the others, apart from the Indy 500, of course. This would have been in beautiful red, of course, if it was in colour. One of the pictures in this deck is in colour. Very small wheels on that Ferrari. This is another Ferrari. Again, it's Ascari, this time at Silverstone, British Grand Prix. Again, the Ferrari Tipo 500. And Ferrari won every race, apart from the last, which was won by an up-and-coming team called Maserati, famous car maker, obviously. And that race, won by Maserati, the last race of 1953, it ended a run of 9 consecutive wins by Alberto Ascari. And it was also the first win by a British driver, Mike Hawthorn. Mike Hawthorn in his Maserati won the last race, but all the other races were won by Ascari in a Ferrari. Back in the 50s, there were only, at this stage, there were only 7 or 8 races a year. So not comparable to today as regards number of races. Britain have gone on to dominate with all the statistics in Formula 1, but this was the first year, 1953 was the first year that they won a race, a British driver won a race. Now this driver, or this car, is the Silver Arrow, the Mercedes-Benz W196. This is Fangio at the Pedralbes circuit in Barcelona in Spain. The grey paint came about because, I believe this story is true, might be one of those old fables, it isn't true, but I like to think it's true, but they were trying to make the car more streamlined and cut down costs at the same time with the Mercedes back in the 30s, not these ones. The Mercedes that used to drive back in the 30s before there was a World Championship. With those cars, they decided to reduce the weight and reduce the friction of any paint. I can't believe that was a big deal back then, but that's what I've heard. And also to cut down costs by simply not painting the cars. And so the grey, the silver, is the natural colour of the metalwork. Now, of course, since then, and I'm sure also here, they were actually painting them silver. But originally they were silver simply because they were not painted. But anyway, this was Mercedes entering the fray, where they would dominate. Alfa Romeo had already pulled out of Formula 1 at this stage. This is the 1955 Mercedes W196 of Stirling Moss at Aintree for the British Grand Prix. Aintree, where the Grand National has been held for countless decades. The British Grand Prix was also held there. His teammate was Fangio, and it was Fangio that actually won the championship. However, despite being in Formula 1 only for 2 years and having lots of success, it was this year that Mercedes pulled out of Formula 1, and they didn't return until 2010. Now, of course, they are at the moment on a dominant streak in Formula One. Anyway, they withdrew from Formula One because of a big accident, or they withdrew from motorsport in general, a big accident at the Le Mans 24 Hour, where I think it was a Mercedes that had an accident. I think there's more than one car that had an accident. But anyway, debris went into the crowd and killed 83 spectators. Imagine that. 83 spectators, and 180 were injured. One driver was killed as well. It's incredible. That's why Mercedes pulled out of Formula One. That left the way open for Ferrari then. With Alfa Romeo gone and Mercedes gone, you had Ferrari looking to dominate again, as they did with Ascari. This is the Lancia Ferrari D50 Fangio. This is at Silverstone again, British Grand Prix. Called the Lancia Ferrari for a while because Lancia sold. The Lancia family sold their controlling stake of Lancia to Ferrari, and I assume part of the deal was to call it the Lancia Ferrari. But after a while that was just changed to the Ferrari D50. Fangio's teammate was Peter Collins, who, as I said in my previous video, came very, very close to winning the championship that year, and lost the championship mainly because he handed his car over to Fangio, who had already retired, and back then you could do that. The team leader, if they retired, would get somebody else's car, so another driver would be called in and he would have to jump out and give his car. And as I said in my previous video, Peter Collins did that without being asked. Ferrari were not going to ask him because they knew he was going for the championship just as much as Fangio. It was the last race of the year, so they were not going to call him in. But he came in for a routine pit stop, saw Fangio sitting in a chair and thought, oh, Fangio must have retired, he's my team leader, I better jump out of my car and give him my car. It's amazing. I don't think that would happen now, and I don't think it should have happened back then either. Peter Collins was sort of hailed as an English gentleman for that, but they were all doing that back then. Well, a lot of them anyway. He never got a shot at the championship much after that, because 2 years later he was killed. Anyway, this is Fangio, not Peter Collins, this picture, but it's the same car, the Ferrari Lancia D50. Another odd thing is that Fangio in this car finished both second and fourth in a race in Monaco. He's classified as finishing both second and fourth because his car retired, so he jumped in another car, and then I believe there was problems with that car. He jumped in a third car, and both the second and the third car finished, and he had shared both the drives, so he was classified as finishing both second and fourth. The points table looked extremely complicated back then. I remember one year 7 drivers shared fastest lap, and back then you got a point for fastest lap, so they all got 0.14 points for the fastest lap from that race. Can't remember what year that was. It was in the 50s though. This is the 1957 Maserati Fangio at Aintree, British Grand Prix. But there was a British team threatening this year for the first time, Van Wall. They won 3 of the last 4 races with Stirling Moss, but it was this car that won the championship for Fangio. At this stage, up to this point, there was no Constructors' Championship, just a Drivers' Championship. It wasn't until 1958 that there was a Constructors' Championship. Maserati withdrew from Formula One around, I think, about 1958 due to financial issues, surprisingly. the Maserati 250F of Fangio, and won the championship. So we come to 1958. This is the Van Wall. This is Tony Brooks. Van Wall. Tony Brooks is still alive, I'm glad to say. British driver. This is him at Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. This was the first British car to take part in Formula One, and British cars pretty much dominated the whole of the 60s after this, and have pretty much dominated ever since. This was the first Constructors' Championship, so Van Wall, not only did they take, actually they didn't take a driver to the World Championship, they only won the Constructors' Championship, that's right. Mike Hawthorne in a Ferrari won the Drivers' Championship, the first British champion. But there were 3 British drivers driving the British Van Wall car, and they finished, I think, 2nd, 3rd and 4th in the championship, behind the other British driver, Mike Hawthorne in a Ferrari. Hawthorne, only the second time in history, the first of 2 times, that a driver has won the championship with just 1 win. The other time being Nico Rosberg in 1982. Sorry, not Nico. His dad, Keke Rosberg, in 1982, who won just 1 race. Anyway, this is the Van Wall, as it says on the side there. Lovely British racing green colour. Back then, cars raced in, this is before sponsorship. The cars were coloured in their national colours. In racing, each country was given a colour. With Great Britain, it was green. With Italy, it was red, which is why Ferrari still race in red. Mercedes, it was silver, which was why they still race in silver. French cars was blue. I think they were the only 4 countries, I think, at the time. '58 was also, again, not this car, but the Cooper was the first rear-engined Grand Prix car to win a race. Before that, all the success was from cars with engines in the front. Of course, after that first success, pretty much all cars were rear-engined in the 60s and onwards. I think this Van Wall was rear-engined, but I'm not 100% certain. This is Tony Brooks, but his teammate Sterling Moss won 4 races this year, but he still lost the championship to Mike Hawthorne, who only won 1 race in his Ferrari. And Brooks, Moss, Collins and Hawthorne won all but 1 race. Maurice Trintignant, a Frenchman, managed to win 1 race, but the other 4 British drivers won every single Formula One race apart from that. Now you see we're getting close to the 60s now, where cars were getting much more attractive, I think. This is the Cooper of Sterling Moss, racing at Goodwood in a non-championship event. Goodwood is a sort of stately home in Great Britain, in England, and they do lots of amateur racing there, and that's what he's doing here. And his teammates were Jack Brabham and Bruce Mclaren. Of course, Jack Brabham would win the championship this year and on 2 other occasions, and would form his own famous team, the Brabham. And so would Bruce Mclaren, of course. He would also form his own team. Brabham and Mclaren were Moss's teammates, but this is a picture of Sterling Moss, who only died earlier this year. So, just as an extra bit of information, I'll tell you how many races those teams won. Cooper won 16 races. It raced in the 60s as well. Van Wall won 9 races in its short time. Maserati won 9. Alfa Romeo won 10. Mercedes are currently on 118, but about 100 of those have come just in the last sort of 7 years or so. Ferrari, 238, more race wins than any other team in history. Brabham, I think they won about 30 races. I haven't got their exact figure with me. I think it was about 30. There you go. Little sample of Grand Prix cars from the 1950s. Next time it'll be drivers from the 1960s. Thank you very much. If you'd like to subscribe, please feel free to do so. I won't mind. Thank you and goodbye.